Before I turns, the devil exists is the beautiful and the dark of life. Introduction. My favorite kind of metalcore. I think perhaps a few reading or listening to this review might recognize the lovingly called subgenre of sorts of debellecore. The term came to mean the general style of metalcore that Before I Turn fall into because a man named Danny DeBella, a man I know and whom has been involved in 1.5 million projects with this style of soundscape. From Blood Moon to Glass Crown to Sails End to Gloom to Before I Turn itself, DeBella has a very signature style of songwriting that I love. Coincidentally, this songwriting style is incredibly similar to Alex Angelis, the primary mind behind Before I Turn and a solo side project called Evergloam. As I said, this quasi-subgenre of metalcore has been named as such mostly out of fun, but I genuinely think this particular style is one of my favorites amongst metalcore, and metal as a whole. There's a particular style to the production and the way electronic elements are incorporated, the way melodies and hooks are utilized against a unique kind of crushing breakdowns, and even the way ballad-esque moments and tracks seep seamlessly into places where they almost shouldn't belong, but do, that makes Before I Turn and other musical acts like it stand out to me. Part 1. How I Fell in Love with Before I Turn, 2018. Getting into a few styles of metal back in 2017 to 2018 met me with many bands that I wasn't sure about at first or had to acquire taste for. Early From Ashes to New made me love the general tendencies of metalcore without overdoing the screaming. Trivium showed me what heavy metal was all about and made me grow to love even hitherto unappealing amounts of unclean vocals, and Slipknot showed me how chaos can actually make something really fun instead of just chaotic. In the midst of those acts of personal musical expression, pre-2016 Crown the Empire told me I loved 2010's metalcore, and next to no other bands were replicating that feeling, even though it was potentially my most favorite specific style of music. Fast track to autumn of 2018, which was definitely still in the middle of this musical exploration. In fact, it was a few months before I even got into deathcore. There might be a handful of folk who watch this that might recognize or perhaps fondly remember the name Kingdom Links, a sort of social media platform for music fans with the long-held tradition of leaking new releases and sometimes going back to classics in the form of a number of file formats from MP3 to FLAC to anything else you could think of. Thursdays were referred to as Leak Day around those parts because, well, new releases were uploaded that morning, a day before they officially came out. Others of you might cringe knowing how big that site got, and I get it. Although I sometimes miss the community and friends I made there, I'm also glad it's gone as a frontrunner of leaking platforms. Piracy isn't cool, and I definitely do not condone it. I never did, in fact, but I must confess that I hold fond memories of being part of the community there while it was thriving. I can only justify myself by saying that the place and the people there introduced me to a range of artists that I might never have heard of in my life without it. I originally joined to be able to listen to Ice Nine Kills The Silver Scream at the time, in October, like many others, though at the time I joined because I had no other way to access it. I didn't have my own phone or similar, and only had a Chromebook assigned to me by my school, a device with blocks on basically every music site known to man. Kingdom Leaks was one of the few that wasn't and became the only way I could listen to anything, whether it was ethical or not. This is why, in spite of my distaste for it, I continued to use Kingdom Leaks. I had no other avenue that I could access back then. That said, many of my favorite artists and albums, Our Hollow Our Homes and Moment in Memory, shines brightly amongst this crowd, I discovered through the site, and though I'm not wholly proud of participating in the piracy culture, it did open my eyes to a lot of stuff. I really got to explore metalcore like I never could have before through it, bands whom I now support wholeheartedly through legitimate methods like merch and CDs and streaming, albeit as little as Spotify or other platforms pay out, but Kingdom Leaks was also how I discovered Before I Turn. Every Thursday, every leak day, I'd peruse the homepage for artists or albums that looked interesting. Well, I'd do this every day, but Thursdays in particular. It was on such a day that Before I Turn's 2018 album, Claustrophobic, was put on the site. I'd of course never heard of the band or the album, but it was labeled metalcore and had a sweet album cover. I loved the color scheme of it. It stood out, and so I downloaded it to give it a listen. Just a regular Thursday morning getting ready for school, right? Well, yeah, actually, that was my routine in those days, and listening to Claustrophobic was no different. Mostly no different, anyway. I don't quite remember if my actual experience listening to it was notably better than most of the other albums I tested out beyond the fact that I quite liked it. It could be just as much my current day self writing a sort of revisionist history just as much as it could be the fact that I recall it being darker tonally than much of the music I'd heard before. But I do at least remember the lyrical concepts and themes of the record hitting weird places. I was at once impressed by how well written it was as a general rule, heightened by the distorted spoken voice intro, outro, and interlude sprinkled throughout, and disturbed a bit by the subject matter. If you know what the story of the album is, as Claustrophobic is a concept album that would be continued by Lovelorn in 2020, you probably understand why I might have felt this way, relatively innocent teenager that I was. Even so, I found myself over the weeks and months that passed enthralled by the performances and the production, the songwriting and the structure, the storytelling and the tone. I simply loved it, and it was at the time my number 5 favorite album of 2018. Though these days I'd update that form of list and call it my number 1, probably, albeit still in contention with what were even then my top 2 favorites. To be honest, I still have a ton of memories, both good and bad, that are eternally tied to certain moments of Claustrophobic at that time. These spread over the first year of its existence, but I think the month of its release, October 2018, is the most profound example of it. Funny enough, a bunch of similar memories are produced when I think of Ice Nine Kills the Silver Scream, too. None of these memories I'm willing to go into here, but I think that's probably for the betterment of your time anyway. Part 2, the Lovelorn Era, 2020 through 2021. The band may be one of my favorites now, but with such a shortage of back catalog to pick through back then, I never clicked with the virus the same way, and I think even Alex wants to forget about the Imposter EP. Once I had had my fill of Claustrophobic in the late 2010s, I more or less forgot that band existed for a little while. This happens to me a lot. I listen to something until I suddenly stop before returning in full swing later. Well, Lovelorn Moon had its release in pandemic era 2020. It was different and unexpected, but I loved it. Though it was only half of the story, only 7 tracks and about a half hour long, with the rest to come later in the year in Lovelorn Sun, I thought the more genty side of things mixed with more diverse song structure and longer tracks made for a few enjoyable shifts to the soundscape that was 100% Before I Turn, but wasn't relying only on the preceding masterpiece. Late in 2020, however, Lovelorn Moon was delisted from streaming services. In its place came the release of the entirety of the album, all 14 songs and 1 full hour of runtime, as was originally intended. The first half dropping was mostly just a boon for sore pandemic-addled hearts. That said, Lovelorn combined with Claustrophobic together made Before I Turn one of my favorite bands, if not straight up number 1 for a couple years. I listened to the band all the time. The 2 albums together became literally my daily drivers going to and from work every night for long night shifts during overhaul at my new job. I bought way too much merch for the band, basically one of almost every single piece designed and put on sale by Brendan, the band's drummer. Unlike Claustrophobic, I have nearly entirely fond memories associated with this record, and the dichotomy of my experience with them both and the love of this story being told, since Lovelorn continues the concept of its predecessor, hooked me. I couldn't wait for whatever these guys had coming next. Part 3, The Road to the Devil Exists, 2023. Not gonna lie, I kind of forgot about Before I Turn again in 2022. Even so, near the end of that year, the band teased they were working on something. It wasn't a lot, but it was definitely enough to hold me over until early April when the first single for The Devil Exists released, titled Oxytocin. Based on the idea of domestic abuse, the song was tonally reminiscent of the band's work up till that point, and despite one word and one line that always feels off every time I listen to the song, I really enjoyed it in ways I don't think I've ever really enjoyed my experience with Before I Turn singles in the past. Side note, the singles for Claustrophobic, especially the title track, are the best songs on the album, but I didn't really click with the 1 or 2 singles for Lovelorn that I listened to before the release of the first half of that record, as discussed earlier. The intent for this album, as it was originally teased, was going to be a very visual record, one where every song was released as a music video before being collected into the full album experience later. Unfortunately, plans in this regard didn't exactly hold up, so the band fell mostly silent until the next single, Reanimate, came out in November, shortly before the full album announcement and tracklist. I confess, I wasn't really a fan of the single. It sonically didn't seem fully what I wanted after Oxytocin, but I was more than happy we were getting new music at all. It was mostly the tracklist and album announcement that had me itching for more. But even that didn't go fully as intended. The album announcement came with the tease of a January release and 10 songs listed. 5 of these songs ended up on the final release, with the 6 I'm assuming being for all intents and purposes the same thing, just with a new name in the final version. So what happened in the interim? Well, about a month and a half after this, Before I Turn posted that The Devil Exists would now be a 6-song EP rather than the previously teased 10-song album. The primary motivations behind this decision seem to be twofold. Well, the combination of factors associated with life and another thing not revealed until later is one, so we'll talk about that in the next section, but it seemed that The Devil Exists would not be another chapter in the claustrophobic and lovelorn story. Instead, it would be a collection of songs that mean a lot to Alex, the primary songwriter. I presume the remaining 4 songs were either completely scrapped or are being repurposed for what will be the next chapter of the story the band has told in the past 2 records. Reportedly, the next album is being worked on right now in the wake of the changes to The Devil Exists and will be what fans of the story want to see moving forward. What does that mean for the EP, though? Did it suddenly get chopped off at the knees, nearly forgotten and given up on? Was it just pushed out to fulfill some sort of obligation with no other thought? Well, no, actually. Quite the opposite, in fact. Part 4, The Dark and the Beautiful, 2024. I know the review has been long up to this point before even talking about the EP itself. Let's just leave it at, I have strong feelings about this band and wanted to talk about a bit of my history with them and also add context to how I feel about the record, the reasons why it worked for me so well. I often do add this kind of context to my reviews, though not usually this lengthy of one. That said, context is the main point of this EP. Unlike the previous 2 albums, The Devil Exists is not story-driven. It doesn't just continue the story put forth, it is the first time the band has simply put together a collection of individual songs in years. There's something freeing and special about that, especially when it comes to each song telling a story of its own, each song being based on something else. The level to which this is felt in the final release is evidently quite intentional, as one can tell by BIT's 2024 marketing strategy leading up to the February 4th release date. To tackle this context as well as my thoughts on it all as they pertain to the tracks, I want to talk about each song individually, much like I normally do, but with perhaps a little deeper of a lyrical analysis than typical. Before I Turn's The Devil Exists is the dark and the beautiful of the human condition. The EP begins with Beginning My Descent to Hell, the longest song on the release, and returning to the band's practice of epic, heavy hitters to come right out swinging. I think the primary riff after the intro to this song is one of the best of the band's lifetime because of the sharp pulse and pace of it. Alex's teaser for the song reads, I wrote this song about what I believe to be one of the most interesting character studies on television, Dexter Morgan. More specifically, spoiler alert, what was going on in his head immediately following Rita's death. Angry at himself for being the reason it happened, angry at himself for not feeling remorse as intensely as he should, I wanted to tie it into the general theme of this EP, which is The Devil Exists, that is to say evils and atrocities, the devil, that we all face in this world exist as perennially as time itself. I haven't watched Dexter, so I can't really speak to that dynamic of the song, but I love the way Alex weaves the idea of the themes of the whole EP into the song as the opening track anyway. Despite my lack of familiarity with the show and the character, Alex is able to separate the subject matter from the inspiration enough that the song stands on its own. It's the story of a man, a murderer, a man who is capable of the unthinkable. Not only do we get to experience the band's classic inclusion of a monologue for the intro, it perfectly lays out the ideas at play. The devil exists and can inhabit the minds of man, that the darkness inherent in such a thing can render the world a place of misery and of a death so deep that life cannot escape. The verses are very reminiscent of much of the lyrical ideas in Claustrophobic, namely those of death and the remorse one should feel. Of course, the songs aren't directly related, but the ideas are such that this band explores quite deeply in every release. Finally, in the midst of the story of beginning my descent to hell is the first half of the chorus with a refrain that you should keep in mind for later. Hold my hand to oblivion, because the simple fact is that the devil exists. And a follow-up thought similarly important. And I hate this world that we're living in, but are we really alive if we're already dead? We'll talk more about this later. Next comes a remixed/remastered version of the first single, Oxytocin. The song calls back to much of the band's past, particularly from their first album, The Virus, utilizing the stereotypically Egyptian-sounding Phrygian dominant scale in the synth. I think the redo of this track makes it even stronger, punching heavier than it already did. The story behind this one was laid out as part of the marketing strategy pretty early on, but the pre-EP teaser says, I wrote the song during the Johnny Depp v. Amber Heard trial. Not one for gossiping about celebrities, but it got me thinking that there's not a lot of talk about domestic abuse from the other side. At the same time, I see Will Smith being completely emasculated by his wife and being told that he is foolish and immature by his own wife. Meanwhile, he takes it on the chin by her and fans who do not hesitate to attack him for being weak in that relationship. One of the scariest things in a toxic relationship is losing yourself so badly that you do not even know who you are until you miraculously come out the opposite side and realized you changed every single thing about yourself for the other person. And for what purpose? Love? Was it even love? What if you never miraculously made it out and you're lost without knowing? This is why knowing, really knowing yourself and loving yourself is so important to me. To match the crush of the musicality, this song is obviously about domestic abuse, and the lyrics hit hard as such. Though I have not personally experienced anything like this, there's so much poignant material to glean from Alex's writing on here that it almost makes me feel bad for enjoying the song as a song so much. Oxytocin begins with the riff, another new refrain that repeats through the track. Crucify me, indicating just how heavy the song is going to be before it actually hits. Similar to the previous track, Alex also does a great job separating the song from the inspiration by making the lyrics more about the experience rather than the story. There's just so much to dig into here that I can't truly talk about all of it. That said, I do want to point out one stanza that gives me chills every single time, and surely gets the point of what it's like to be abused well. Perpetuate my suffering, that's all you ever do. I wish you'd steal my oxytocin so I'm rid of you. If not for the context of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, I'd almost be worried if maybe Alex's marriage isn't so pretty as we are led to believe. The song is just that potent. Reanimate came next, the single that I initially wasn't too hot on. I think it might still be my least favorite from an instrumental perspective, but it definitely hits a lot different for me now than it did early on, due entirely to the context behind it. One of the few reasons we decided to shorten this release to an EP. In November, my wife and I went through the most traumatic experience either of us have ever been through, still something we are dealing with to this day and perhaps the rest of our lives. We had a miscarriage. I saw a quote online, I'll hold you in my heart till the day I hold you in heaven, and frankly every time I hear that it gets me emotional. While my child waits for us for years to reunite with them in whatever lies beyond this world, I wanted, and frankly needed, to immortalize them. And what better way than through this music? But like the lyrics of the song, although I will continue to live my life, I say to you, my perfect child, for now I wait till you reanimate someday. Knowing this, I don't think it's possible for me to not feel different about Reanimate than I did at first. When it comes right down to it, I can't really analyze this one on a lyrical level because once you know the story behind it, the lyrics are unbelievably straightforward. This is just a topic that means a lot to me. Though I didn't actively experience anything quite this traumatic, I still hauled on to the gut feeling that something similar happened. I'll never know if I was going to be a father a few years ago, and that uncertainty still hurts sometimes. The idea that one can feel the connection with their unborn kin so strongly is a beautiful thing, despite how dark it really is fundamentally. They say that it's the end, but I feel you clinging to life, out of body but forever in mind. I'll never stop believing of your soul entwined in mine. Nearly destroyed me when I first listened to Reanimate again, knowing what it's about. I've Been Searching for You is a bit more of an introspective track with a broadly slower and softer soundscape. If you're a fan of Alex Anglis, the frontman and primary writer for Before I Turn, There's a chance you've heard of his side project, Evergloam, which is basically just Before I Turn, but based on Skyrim. Well, I'd also say that there are certain aspects to Alex's writing for Evergloam that slightly differ from the core sound of BIT, and this song might be the best bridge in explaining that. The plodding pace and the style of melodic vocal performance are very akin to that first EP Alex released as Evergloam. Anyway, I Have Been Searching for You is not one that I find myself intensely relating to very much, but the amount of people I've seen saying it's their favorite definitely tells a different story than me here, much like the inspiration behind it. This one is tied for probably my favorite song on the EP. This song I wrote to myself about the seemingly never-ending battle of never being 100% content with what you see in the mirror. While I don't necessarily see this as a favorite of mine, I do actually get a bit of why people relate to it. Self-image issues can manifest in a number of different ways, most commonly in a form of body dysphoria or even dysmorphia, which can cripple people. At its core, this song is about this struggle, just as Alex said himself. It's a song about the version of a person as they appear in the mirror talking with the version from real life. It's a melancholic track about the struggle to make the two worlds come together. There are several sets of lyrics that really sell this despair, too. Do you hate me? Do you know me? Have you ever loved me? Like a wick that burns through the night, yet my heart will search for you. From the end of the first verse stands out, conjoining the similar sections from the following two verses. Furthermore, the bridge is heartbreaking. Perfect stranger, I don't deserve your love. A reminder that for many, this battle for self-worth can last even in the face of the evidence besides. Though I mentioned that I don't intensely relate to the song, it's still powerful enough to make me consider aspects of myself that I've not fully understood or come to grips with in a way. I make videos and record scripts online, and something that I know many people, maybe even most people, have a hard time with is hearing their own voice on a recording, a problem that I've never really had for some strange reason. I can never tell if the reason is because my voice as it sounds to me is so different from that on a recording that I'm subconsciously tricking myself into thinking it's that of a different person, or if it's the complete opposite problem and my voice and the two contexts are actually so similar that it doesn't seem weird. I feel as if I'm weird because I don't experience this dysphoria with my own voice. But perhaps a bit more on topic, I've also found I have a strange image of myself physically as well. As I've grown older, and especially as my face has changed, I've found that I don't really connect with the image of myself that I see in a mirror or on video. It's a very strange phenomenon in that while I don't feel any drive to change it or fix it, as a lot of people do, I do consciously recognize that I don't recognize myself in a mirror. It's weird. I see pictures of myself as a kid or even as a young teenager and I can say, yeah, that's me. But I don't think I can say the same since graduating high school. Maybe it's because of the beard I've had the last few years, maybe it's because of my damn near total loss of hair, maybe it's the simply absurd elongation of my face making me look like the Scream mask. Maybe it's a combination of all of these. I may not feel an inherent despair like this song tells of, but it has had me reflecting on my own self-image a bit and wondering what conclusions I have come upon over the years, if any. Maybe that's a journey of reflection I have yet to take. The next track, Under the Vermilion Sun, I think might be the one I recall the least about from the EP, perhaps partially due to my remembering very little of the context behind it as well. Context that goes like this. The other song tied for my favorite on this EP. A couple of years ago, I discovered Stoicism, and it changed my life. We can learn a lot from Marcus Aurelius Seneca and modern Stoics like Donald Robertson. If we knew exactly what followed death, would it be as daunting? If we knew there was another side, would we be as fearful of dying? I think generally speaking the answer is no. Thus, it is not death that we fear, it is uncertainty. Since death is the most common thing in life, then should it not be the thing we fear least? This song is about the interior battle I fight between the anxiety of existential dread and stoicism. That said, on my most recent listen following along with these lyrics, this is easily the weakest song for me overall between the combination of musicality and vocal performance. Even so, the lyrics are still very fun to explore as always. Remember when I said we'd be talking about some of the lyrical refrains from the chorus of Beginning My Descent to Hell? Well, this song is why. The totality of the bridge in this song, itself a form of repeat from a part of the first verse, reflects the primary line in that first song. We are all in the dark and we're falling apart. It's the story of a million years of death. As I fall into the solemn abyss, we all have proof that the devil exists. As part of the intro says, why won't you hold my hand through oblivion? To ask a question about one of those earliest lines on the EP. The very next line says, when we leave this world that we're living in, are we departing from life or are we one with Vermilion? To bring back the line about life and death, which is also finally brought back even further in the outro with, we're dead longer than we're alive, we'll forever fear the end, which not only does a lot to close some of the forefront themes of the EP, rounding out some of the most standout lines from the beginning of it, and finally reflecting upon the themes as Alex outlined. Under the Vermilion Sun comes around and reflects on these themes from, ironically, the complete opposite kind of viewpoint, that being Stoicism, as the first song. In a way, it almost feels circular. This almost feels like it should be the final track. But wait, there's one more full-length song to go. The last full song is World Eater, easily the most unique track on the EP from a songwriting and sonic perspective. Although Under the Vermilion Sun introduces a couple of these ideas, this one continues it, that being the modern instrumental Genty Thal style that I know most explicitly from Olympus Lenticular. Some interesting decisions here. Additionally, World Eater sees perhaps the broadest scope and the most unique perspective of the individual stories, making it an apt closer despite how well the previous one could have been. About it, Alex says, millions of years ago we can say this was the planet of the dinosaurs. So where does our species come in? Scientists say Mars was once a blue planet, rich with water. Now it's left barren and dried out. If Earth was the planet of dinosaurs, what was Mars the planet of? We think, what if aliens exist, but what if we are the aliens? Somewhere along the way, we lost our give and take relationship with Earth. We lost our respect for nature. What if we did the same thing with Mars? What if we deprived the planet of resources and moved on to Earth to repeat the process? The final song of the EP is about this theory. Evidently, the scope of this one is much different than previous songs. While I am certainly not an adherent of the particular theory expressed in World Eater, it is a brutally heavily song with a ton of great vocal decisions, reminiscent of the heaviest moments on Lovelorn that have been largely absent on The Devil Exists. Though I almost have to stretch my mind to make World Eater, in a sense, fit on the EP like the rest of the songs, I still love it for what it is. Alas, The Devil Exists is still not quite over yet. The actual final track, albeit only a minute long, is called The Tailor. As I mentioned briefly earlier, I believe this one is just the end from the original tracklist announcement, but obviously retitled. There's not a whole lot to this one, just closing off the themes of the album and reinvigorating the need to listen more, as Before I Turn's finales basically always do. Even though The Devil Exists is not a concept record, The Tailor still excels in making the whole experience a bit of a round, practically necessitating putting the whole thing on repeat. Conclusion, opinions, and expectations. At the end of the day, I really wasn't sure what I was expecting, let alone wanted, from The Devil Exists. Sure, more Before I Turn in general is good enough to satisfy, but between all the changes to the album before its final release, a trend for the band the last couple albums for better or worse, and the fact that I loved one single and was really unsure about the other, well, I already said, I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Every listen through this EP has shifted my opinion of it in some sense, from something as simple as connecting to the message of Reanimate, to pondering about myself through I've Been Searching for You, to wondering about the future of the band's various elements in every single song. I think this EP is a joy to listen to, easily on par with anything they've written. Of course, I still have nostalgia for Claustrophobic, and being actively a part of the ride in certain parts of Lovelorn gets to me too. But I really enjoy what Alex especially has done with this one, writing something in a completely different vein than what I think this band is known for. That said, I absolutely cannot wait to see what the next chapter of the Claustrophobic story has in store for us, and I'm glad we were able to get something exciting in the meantime. It feels like it's been longer than 3 years Lovelorn came around, but in the meantime, there's still plenty Before I Turn to listen to. P.S. Sorry this review was so long. I feel like all of the context I added ahead of time was worth going through, as I don't feel justified in a discography ranking for this band at the moment, and all it really meant is that this post wound up being longer even than my Orbit Culture discography ranking, which was longer than any other script I've posted on this channel until now. This is the longest script I've turned into a video since my Grime a Critical Analysis video nearly 2 years ago, and my Little Nightmares a Critical Analysis Part 2 about 1.5 years before that. Come to think, at this length, there's every chance this video ends up longer than the EP in the first place. All that to say, thank you graciously if you've watched to this point. You're half the reason I make these videos. The other half is just because I really like to make them. But thank you so much regardless for checking this out if you did. This band is a favorite, and apparently I have a lot to say about them. I hope if you haven't checked out The Devil Exists or any of their back catalog yet, that you consider doing so now. In the meantime, I still have my Game of the Year video to finish putting together. It'll still be a couple weeks before that one's out, but I hope you'll subscribe so you don't miss it when it comes out. Making scripted content the past several months and getting back into gaming content where I can include my footage that I've continued to record for seemingly no reason is really, really exciting. See you there.